Bella, now 10, was pulling Ava's hair while Caroline smacked her with a wooden spoon.
Please, Mommy, stop. Bella, I'm sorry.
They didn't stop. I dropped my bag and ran to them, shoving both of them away. What is wrong with you two? Have you both lost your minds?
Don't you dare interfere, Elizabeth. This is my house, and I'll discipline my child however I see fit.
Discipline? This isn't discipline. It's abuse. Look at her.
If you care so much, why don't you take her? I don't want her. She's nothing but a burden.
Caroline, you can't be serious.
Oh, I am. If you don't take her, I'll beat her to death one of these days. Mark my words.
Ava was still in tears, listening to everything her mother was saying. I couldn't leave her there. I wasn't married, and I had no children of my own, but I wasn't about to let Caroline destroy this innocent child. Fine, I'll take her. Pack your things, Ava. You're coming with me. That night, Ava and I left Caroline's house. My name is Elizabeth, and let me tell you a story about my sister Caroline. Caroline's marriage was supposed to be the highlight of her life. She had always dreamed of a future filled with luxury, but dreams don't always align with reality. She married Mark at 24, swept up in his promises of a life filled with adventure. They seemed happy in the beginning, two young people in love, ready to conquer the world together. But all of that came crashing down when Caroline found out she was pregnant just a year into their marriage. By then, Caroline was at the peak of her career as a journalist. So when she got pregnant, she felt like the baby had destroyed her life. I'll never forget the day she called me. Her voice was frantic. She was obviously in disbelief.
Elizabeth, I can't believe this is happening. I was supposed to have time to enjoy my life. I didn't sign up for this.
I tried to console her, telling her that things would work out. But deep down, I knew Caroline. She wasn't ready for motherhood, not in the way it demanded patience, sacrifice, and unconditional love. She wasn't built for it, or rather, she didn't want to be. When Ava was born, Mark was ecstatic, proudly showing off their daughter to anyone who would listen. But Caroline? She looked detached, almost resentful, as if Ava had stolen something irreplaceable from her. From the start, Caroline struggled. Ava cried often, as babies do, and Caroline was always on edge.
She won't stop screaming. I've tried everything. She just hates me.
I felt sad for the baby who was always crying. Caroline refused to hold her, saying Ava hated her and wouldn't like it if she held her. That was such a ridiculous excuse. She doesn't hate you, Caroline. She's just a baby. They cry. But Caroline wouldn't hear it. To her, Ava was the reason her life had taken such a drastic turn. The years went by, and the nonchalance only grew. By the time Ava was 6, Caroline was barely trying to hide her disdain. She fulfilled the basic duties of motherhood, feeding her, clothing her, making sure she went to school, but there was no warmth, no affection. One evening, I visited Caroline unannounced. She was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, while Ava sat at the kitchen table, her homework spread out in front of her. She looked like she was struggling to understand the homework. When I greeted Ava, she couldn't smile well. She looked so sad.
You should have called.
Well, I wanted to check on you. How are things?
Exhausting. This isn't the life I wanted, Elizabeth. I wanted freedom, excitement. Instead, I'm stuck here, playing house with a kid who drives me insane.
I looked at Ava, who was pretending not to hear. My heart ached for her. She's just a child, Caroline. She needs you. Cut her some slack.
Well, I didn't ask for her. I didn't ask to have my life derailed. Mark wanted her, not me. And now he's always away on business trips, leaving me with an unwanted thing. She messed up my life goals.
It was clear that Ava felt the impact of her mother's resentment. She was a quiet, sensitive child, always eager to please but rarely rewarded for her efforts. One time, Ava drew a picture of their family, Caroline, Mark, and herself. She proudly showed it to her mother, but Caroline didn't care. She told Ava to leave her alone, saying she had more important things to do than look at some ugly drawing. Ava was sad, but the child didn't complain. She simply walked away with her drawing. Mark tried his best to make up for Caroline's coldness, but he was often away on travels, leaving Ava alone with her mother. The dynamic was unbearable. Caroline would snap at Ava for the smallest things like spilling a glass of water, leaving her toys on the floor, asking too many questions.
Why can't you just be quiet for 5 minutes? Or would you like me to render you dumb?
One afternoon, Ava accidentally knocked over a vase.
I'm sorry, Mommy.
Sorry doesn't fix the vase, does it? You'll be punished.
For a whole day, Caroline refused to feed Ava. Until the girl almost passed out, she didn't give her food. I often found myself stepping in where Caroline failed because I felt sad for the child. I'd take Ava out for ice cream or to the park, trying to give her moments of joy. I can vividly remember one time when Ava brought snow into the house on her shoes. Caroline forced the kid to mop the whole house that night, and she slept without any food because Caroline refused to give her any. One day, as we sat on a bench, Ava asked me if I was sure her mother loved her. The question broke me. I held back my tears and told her, of course her mother loved her.
But she doesn't hug me like other mommies hug their kids. She gets mad at me a lot. Do you think it's my fault? She said I'm at fault for coming to life when I shouldn't have.
I felt so angry at Caroline for putting such thoughts in Ava's young mind. I managed to convince Ava that she was not at fault. When Ava turned 7, Caroline announced she was pregnant again. This time her reaction was different. She seemed excited, almost relieved.
Maybe this baby will make things better.
As the months passed, Caroline's treatment of Ava worsened. She was harsher, more impatient, as if Ava's very presence irritated her. She used her pregnancy as an excuse to distance herself even further. She'd shoo Ava away whenever she sought attention and beat her up at the slightest provocation. By the time Bella was born, Ava had learned to navigate her mother's moods. She kept her head down, did what was asked of her, and stayed out of the way. But even then, it was never enough. One evening, as I visited to help with the newborn, I overheard Caroline talking to Mark.
Bella's so perfect. She's everything I ever wanted.
What about Ava?
Do I look like I care about her?
I was angry. Ava deserved so much better than this. As I left that night, I saw Ava in her room crying. I quickly went in to comfort her.
Auntie Liz, do you think Mommy will like me more now that Bella's here?
I couldn't bring myself to lie this time because I knew that wouldn't happen. Instead, I hugged her. You're an amazing little girl, Ava. Don't ever forget that, okay? Caroline's resentment toward Ava didn't just linger. After Bella was born, she became the center of attention. Bella looked exactly like Caroline from birth, and Caroline doted on her. Ava, who had already learned to tiptoe around her mother, now faced an even harsher reality. Caroline would hit her for the smallest mistakes, her hand flying at the slightest provocation.
Why can't you be like your sister? She's a joy, and you're nothing but trouble.
Ava would flinch at every raised hand, every shouted insult. She stopped asking for hugs, stopped trying to share her little achievements. Bella, meanwhile, basked in their mother's affection, and as she grew older, she began mirroring Caroline's behavior. Bella was 4 when she first refused to share a toy with Ava.
Please, Bella. I just want to play for a little while. No! Mommy says you're annoying.
It was the start of a pattern. Bella would fight with Ava, screaming at her or pulling her hair, and Caroline would side with Bella every single time.
Stop bothering your sister, Ava. Can't you see she doesn't want to play with you?
Whenever I visited, I could see the pain in Ava's eyes, the way her shoulders slumped when Bella ignored her or Caroline scolded her. When Mark died during a business trip, Caroline's hatred turned worse. One day, I arrived unannounced and heard Ava's screams before I even opened the door. My heart raced as I rushed inside to find Caroline and Bella beating Ava. Bella, now 10, was pulling Ava's hair while Caroline smacked her with a wooden spoon.
Please, Mommy, stop. Bella, I'm sorry.
They didn't stop. I dropped my bag and ran to them, shoving both of them away. What is wrong with you two? Have you both lost your minds?
Don't you dare interfere, Elizabeth. This is my house, and I'll discipline my child however I see fit.
Discipline? This isn't discipline, it's abuse. Look at her.
If you care so much, why don't you take her? I don't want her. She's nothing but a burden.
Caroline, you can't be serious.
Oh, I am. If you don't take her, I'll beat her to death one of these days. Mark my words.
Ava was still in tears, listening to everything her mother was saying. I couldn't leave her there. I wasn't married, and I had no children of my own. but I wasn't about to let Caroline destroy this innocent child. Fine, I'll take her. Pack your things, Ava. You're coming with me. That night, Ava and I left Caroline's house. I rented a small apartment far from my sister and enrolled Ava in a new school, where she wouldn't have to face Bella's bullying. Slowly but surely, Ava began to heal. I did everything I could to make her feel loved and safe. I celebrated her birthdays with cakes and gifts, attended every school event, and reminded her every day how special she was. Years passed, and Ava flourished. By the time she was 24, she had become a rising star in the movie industry. Her name was everywhere: billboards, magazine covers, movie posters. People adored her, and she had worked hard for every bit of her success. Bella, on the other hand, was a different story. Spoiled and entitled, she had grown into a rebellious teenager. She dropped out of high school in her final year after getting pregnant. Caroline, desperate to help Bella, took on the role of caregiver for Bella's baby. But Bella didn't care. She partied, smoked, and stole, leaving Caroline to clean up her messes. To make matters worse, Bella's boyfriend scammed her, convincing her to sell most of Caroline's belongings. By the time he disappeared, they were nearly destitute. Caroline, who had once doted on Bella, was now miserable. One evening, Caroline showed up at the house Ava had recently bought for the two of us.
Elizabeth, please. I need to see Ava. I've made mistakes, terrible mistakes. I need her to forgive me.
Ava, who had been relaxing in the living room, appeared behind me. Without a word, she turned and walked to her room. Moments later, she returned holding a baseball bat.
Ava, please, I'm sorry.
But Ava didn't care. She raised the bat and began chasing Caroline and hit her a few times.
Stop, Ava, please.
Her screams filled the house, but Ava didn't stop until Caroline ran out, humiliated and bruised. Caroline returned a week later, but Ava wasn't home. This time, I decided to take matters into my own hands. You've caused enough pain, Caroline. You don't deserve her forgiveness. I released my dog, and it chased her, humiliating her just as Ava would have wanted. The neighbors saw her running like a madwoman and laughed. The third time she came, both Ava and I were ready. Together, we beat her so severely that she left bleeding and swore never to return. She went to our family to complain, but no one sided with her. You're reaping what you've sown, Caroline. Don't expect sympathy from us. Caroline was left alone to deal with Bella and her reckless behavior. Ava, meanwhile, continued to rise in the industry, becoming one of the most beloved actresses of her generation. Whenever people asked about her mother, she would tell them, "I'm her mother." At events, she introduced me to everyone as her mom, and I couldn't have been prouder. Ava was my daughter in every way that mattered, and I loved her more than anything. By the way, Caroline suffered from a stroke a year later. Bella didn't want to take care of her mother, so she took her child and ran away. The last time I heard about them, Bella had tried to sell her child but was caught by the police and arrested. Her child was seized by the government, and she was in jail. Caroline was paralyzed with no one to look after her. Ava and I were happy, and Caroline's misery wasn't our business, so we stayed out of it. Thanks for watching.
Yeah, cry. It's how dumb and guilty people defend themselves.
Get me the whip, Annabelle.
I panicked and turned to my mom for help, but she only asked my sister to be fast about it. That night, I was flogged like a criminal over my sister's words. I cried myself to sleep and woke up with a fever and swollen eyes. I asked if I could skip school for the day, but my sister made them refuse.
She doesn't have a fever. She's just shy about her boyfriend seeing her in such a condition. She knows she looks like shit.
That's true. You're going to school. Now get back to your room and get dressed.
I was born at quite a late age by my parents. At the time I was born, my mom was 42 and my dad 45. I had an older sister who was 15 then. You would think they'd have spoiled me so much and given me the whole world. Well, that didn't happen. My name's Angel. Growing up, I wasn't so bright. Now imagine a home where both parents are very smart academically, including their first child. And then, the second child comes in and shatters all their hopes for another smartass. That was how I was to my family. They were so obsessed with being academically brilliant and tried all they could to get me to their level, but nothing worked. By the time I got into junior high school, my sister was already rounding up with college. She was strict. She would drop me off at my school every morning and also pick me up. One would think it was fun, but it was hell. Our journey to my school every morning was filled with every sort of insult she could think about. She would hold my hand so tightly, knowing it hurt, but would never let go. Now, seeing how they were all treating me, one would think I was a pure dullard. But I wasn't. I was always among the top 5, but they expected me to always top my class like my elder sister. One time, during dinner, my parents and sister were having a conversation. She was telling them about how some students were offering to pay her to be taught. According to her, they were struggling with understanding their final classes and were desperate for her help.
Let's just hope Angel doesn't end like that someday. She's dull like them. I can't help but be worried now.
That would be so embarrassing for us. Ugh, God shouldn't have given me another child if he was going to bring a dumb one. I was okay with just Annabelle.
It's not my fault that I'm not as intelligent as you three, is it? Besides, I'm not that dull. I'm always among the top 5. Why are y'all acting like I'm a failure? I was only trying to defend myself, but it escalated so quickly that I was left shocked. My mother suddenly banged her hands on the table, causing me to flinch in fear.
How dare you talk back to us? Do you know how young you are compared to us 3? Have you lost your respect and senses?
Ignore her, Mom. She's being this way because she has a boyfriend now. You know how these kids grow wings when they start dating.
My eyes widened in shock and confusion. I didn't have a friend at school because I was too shy to speak to people. How could I suddenly have a boyfriend? What are you saying, Annabelle?
Oh, shut it! I caught you yesterday with that boy. You were both talking, and when you saw me, you quickly stopped talking to him.
I did recall having a conversation with a boy in my class who was only asking around for anyone who could help him with his tea fare. He'd forgotten to bring some money along and had no money to go home with. I told him I had nothing and looked away. Right at the same time, Annabelle appeared. That's a misunderstanding, Annabelle. He was asking everyone for some money. I told him I had none, and that's when you appeared.
Hear that, Mom? That's the excuse a dumb person would give if caught committing a crime.
My dad stood up, his nose flaring in anger. I knew I had to convince him that I was telling the truth, but there was no possible way. The thought of that and the fear of what he could do to me brought tears to my eyes.
Yeah, cry. It's how dumb and guilty people defend themselves.
Get me the whip, Annabelle.
I panicked and turned to my mom for help, but she only asked my sister to be fast about it. That night, I was flogged like a criminal over my sister's words. I cried myself to sleep and woke up with a fever and swollen eyes. I asked if I could skip school for the day, but my sister made them refuse.
She doesn't have a fever. She's just shy about her boyfriend seeing her in such a condition. She knows she looks like shit.
That's true. You're going to school. Now get back to your room and get dressed.
In pain, I headed back to my room where I sluggishly put my uniform on and prepared for school. She soon graduated from college and instantly got a job on first try at a big hospital. Of course, my parents were so proud and another round of comparison began.
Your sister got such a great job on her first try. I dare you, Angel. I dare you to not pass your first interview, too.
That was quite the dare. I had only started college, and the pressure of passing my first interview was already on me. I surely wasn't having the best life. My sister's job was going very smoothly. According to her, the pay was very huge, and she occupied an important seat. In the 4th month of her working there, she bought a house for herself. I was shocked. 2 months later, she bought another house and gave it to my parents. Their joy knew no bounds. They boasted to their friends and other family members about their daughter buying 2 houses in 6 months of being a doctor. I was put under even more fire.
Do you see your sister? That's a good child. And there's you, struggling to even pass your exams. You're nothing but a mistake. I wished we didn't have you.
I wasn't hurt by their words anymore. I'd gotten used to being told I was an unwanted child. I simply focused on my studies, doing the best I could. I had a great passion for cooking and baking. My parents always said the only thing I was good at was cooking, and they wished a chef had birthed me instead of them. Yeah, in my case, the rare times I was complimented, a hurtful word had to follow. I was always watching cooking and baking videos, and trying my best to recreate mine. The few I was able to do came out so well. In my second year in college, I discovered a cooking academy that produced most of the great chefs I looked up to. They were hosting a class for another set of students. I badly wanted to get in. I couldn't ask my parents for money because my sister was in charge of their upkeep after stopping them from working. The only person I had was my sister. Although I was sure she wouldn't help me, I went to her. I was on my knees in her house, begging her in tears. When I first told her about it, she'd told me I'd need to do some things before she could help me. I agreed, desperately. She made me clean her house, do her laundry, cook, and even go grocery shopping for her. Afterward, I'd thought she'd give me the money, but she refused. I begged and begged, but all fell on deaf ears.
I can't let you be a chef. You're either going to work at a hospital or do nothing. Get out of my house.
I lay on the floor in tears and begged my sister with every pleading word I could think of, but she vehemently refused to help me. Even worse, she dragged me roughly on the floor to her door and kicked me out of her house. As she threw my purse at me, it landed on my eyebrow, causing me to scream out in pain, but that didn't affect her. She warned me to never step foot in her house again. The next day, the few friends I'd made in college were shocked to see my swollen eye. They asked what happened, and I explained to them. They felt so bad for me. Instantly, the three of them gathered the required amount and transferred it to my bank account. I was shocked and thanked them in tears.
We know how you support us with every blood you have in you, and we're aware of your passion for cooking. We're going to give you the same support no matter what it takes.
I was so emotional and grateful to them. After school, one of the girls took me to her dad's hospital for treatment. There, I was met with the shock of my life. I saw Annabelle. However, instead of being in a doctor's uniform, she was dressed as a cleaner. I asked a nurse there, and I was told that my sister was one of the cleaners. Now, if she's an ordinary cleaner, how does she get her money? My confusion was cleared when news reached us that my sister was arrested as part of those who sold fake drugs at the hospital. Added to that, she was also involved in the sale of marijuana and other hard drugs in a warehouse close to the hospital. That was where her money was. My parents were in despair. At the court, when I was asked if I believed that my sister was capable of such, I answered yes. As revenge, I went ahead to lie that my parents had caught her doing drugs when I was much younger. Yes, she deserved that. I also added that my parents knew what she was doing and hid it because they were getting money from her and were living in the house she bought them. My words didn't add to the evidence, but it was enough to prove that she was truly bad. My parents were ignored when they tried to counter what I said. My sister was given a 38-year jail term with hard labor. Her properties were all confiscated, leaving my old parents homeless. Of course, they disowned me for what I'd said, but I didn't bother. Even more, we got to know that my sister had bribed her way through school and wasn't as intelligent as we thought, and she also accepted to be a cleaner at the hospital because she wanted her first interview to land her a job. Since my parents were desperate to have her as a doctor, she took the job as it was at a hospital. Little wonder she never let them go to the hospital. My friends got me an apartment and even helped me find a part-time job. I was able to register at the academy and combined it with work and school. No family members accepted my parents in. Why? Well, I contacted the few who were still alive and reminded them of my parents being bad people who could do anything for money. I told them my parents asked me to start selling drugs too, so I can take care of them now that Annabelle is in jail. They disowned me because I refused. They felt pity for me. Two offered to take me in, but I refused and thanked them instead. My parents both got run over by a car and died at the spot after roaming the streets for 2 months. They were buried by the government because I refused being tagged as their child after I got disowned. I graduated as one of the best students in the cooking academy and was included in their viral cooking show. I worked there for a year before I opened my own restaurant. Surprisingly, it blew up so much in a year that I had to open another branch. I got myself a comfortable house. I visited my sister in her 5th year in jail when I'd become so rich and popular that I even had my own cooking academy and cooking show. It's fun to see my smartass sister sitting in this prison while I, the dumb one, is having my best life, enjoying freedom without fear.
I hate you so much, Angel.
Oh, I hate you even more, darling. I do hope you live your last days here.
33 years is nothing. I'll be out before you know it.
I laughed at her. Well, she believes she'll be out soon. But what she didn't know was, I had paid an inmate to act like she had been severely injured, and is going to accuse her of trying to murder her. Attempted murder is going to get her more years there. I'm not so cruel, am I?
Come to my house. Don't tell anyone where you're going. His voice was calmer than I expected. I thought this was my chance to finally prove that I wasn't a mistake, that I was worth being loved by him. I grabbed my shoes and left. My adoptive mother was in the kitchen.
Where are you going?
Just out for a bit. I didn't want to ruin the moment by revealing where I was headed. I felt this was a personal step forward, something my parents didn't need to be involved in, especially after my grandfather had instructed me to not tell them. When I arrived at my grandfather's house, something felt off. The curtains were drawn, and the house was eerily quiet. Come in. Once I stepped inside, I saw two large men sitting on the couch, staring at me. They stood up the moment I entered, and before I could say a word, they grabbed me. "What are you doing? Let me go!" They dragged me down a hallway, ignoring my screams and struggles. My grandfather followed behind, his face blank, showing no remorse. "Take him to the back." The men shoved me into a small, dark room and slammed the door shut. I heard the lock click, and my heart sank. "Let me out, please." "You'll stay there until you're gone for good. No one will miss you. You were never supposed to be part of this family." My adoptive father was my grandfather's only son out of his 3 kids. My adoptive mother's parents were long gone by the time she married my father, and so she was fully absorbed into his family. When they got married, it was a joyous occasion. Everyone celebrated the union, including my grandfather, who often bragged about how lucky my father was to have found such a loyal and hardworking woman. But 2 years passed, and there was no child. Another 2 years came and went, and the whispers began. My grandfather's patience wore thin. He started questioning my mother during family gatherings. "Why haven't you given my son a child yet? Is something wrong with you?" My father tried to defend her, but my grandfather was relentless. "Maybe she's barren. What kind of woman doesn't give her husband a child after 4 years?" My mother endured the humiliation in silence, but when they finally went for tests, the results revealed the truth. My father was impotent. My grandfather was furious. "How can this be? My only son can't give me a grandchild? What kind of curse is this?" Despite the blame and anger directed at him, my father sank into quiet shame. He couldn't look anyone in the eye. But my mother didn't waver. She proposed the idea of adoption.
I love you, and we can still have a family. Let's adopt a child and raise them as our own.
It took months of convincing, but my father eventually agreed. That's how I came into their lives. I was 2 years old, a quiet boy with wide eyes who didn't know what was happening when they brought me home. The rest of the family was hesitant at first, but they grew to accept me. All except my grandfather. "This boy is not your blood. He's not one of us, and he never will be. Worse is, he has black gush." He said it directly to my parents, as though I weren't standing right there. I may have been small, but I understood the hatred in his voice. From then on, every interaction with him was a reminder that I didn't belong. If my parents brought me to visit him, he would leave the room. "Why do you keep bringing that boy here? I don't want him in my house." He refused to sit with me at family dinners. If I tried to greet him, he would look right past me, as though I were invisible. "Don't force me to acknowledge what isn't mine." I remember one Christmas when the entire family gathered at his house. The adults were laughing, the kids were playing, and there I was, sitting in a corner, watching it all from a distance. The kids were running around, but every time I tried to join them, my grandfather would call them over. "Don't mix with him too much. He's not like you. He will probably end up in prison someday. They never amount to anything." I overheard those words, and they stayed with me. I didn't understand why he hated me so much, but it was clear that nothing I did could change it. One day, when I was about 7, my parents took me to visit him again. I was excited, hoping that maybe this time would be different. Maybe he would smile at me, or talk to me like he did with my cousins. But as soon as we arrived, he frowned. I stood there. "Why is he here again? I told you I don't want to see that boy in my house."
He's your grandson. whether you like it or not.
He's not my grandson. He's a stranger you brought into this family. I know that you forced my son to do this. He's our son, Dad. He deserves your love and respect. Respect? For someone who isn't even ours? Never. Holding my mother's hand, tears stinging my eyes. She knelt down beside me and hugged me tightly, whispering words of comfort, but it didn't help. The damage was done. As I grew older, the hatred became more blatant. My grandfather started excluding me from family traditions. When he handed out gifts, there was always one less for me. When he shared stories of our lineage, he would pointedly say things like, "This is for my real grandchildren I know, not the adopted ones." I tried my best to win his approval. I brought home good grades, hoping he'd notice. I offered to help him with chores during family visits, but he would wave me away. "Don't touch that. You'll ruin it. You'll stain it." It wasn't just his words. It was the way he looked at me, as though I were a burden, an inconvenience. My parents tried to shield me from it, but there was only so much they could do. They loved me fiercely, and I knew they were doing everything they could to make up for the gap my grandfather created. One day, when I was 12, my grandfather fell ill. My parents insisted on visiting him, and they brought me along despite his protests. I sat quietly in the corner of his room, watching as my mother fussed over him, and my father tried to make him comfortable. "Why did you bring him here?"
Because he's your grandson, and he deserves to be here.
"He's not my grandson. He's just a reminder of what I'll never have." The words stung, but by then, I was used to them. I stayed quiet, not wanting to upset my parents further. As the years went on, my relationship with my grandfather didn't improve. I stopped trying to win his affection and focused on building my own sense of worth. My parents were my rock, always reminding me that I was loved and valued. When I turned 16, I decided to confront him one last time. It was at a family gathering, and I found him sitting alone in the garden, staring at the sky. "I just want to know why, Grandpa. Why do you hate me so much?" "Because you're not one of us. You'll never be." "Grandpa, I didn't ask to be adopted. I didn't ask to be brought into this family. But I am here, and I'm not going anywhere. Can't you try to love me, please?" "Get out. You irritate me. Your biological parents hated you. That is why they abandoned you at the orphanage, so get out. I do not want to inhale the same air as someone who isn't part of my family. Get lost." On my 18th birthday, my grandfather didn't even call. He never attended my other birthdays or even called, but I'd hoped it would be different on my 18th. Unfortunately, it wasn't. About a week later, my grandfather suddenly called me. I was shocked, stunned, and excited. I thought, maybe, after all this time, he had a change of heart. Maybe he wanted to make amends. "Come to my house. Don't tell anyone where you're going." His voice was calmer than I expected. I thought this was my chance to finally prove that I wasn't a mistake, that I was worth being loved by him. I grabbed my shoes and left. My adoptive mother was in the kitchen.
Where are you going?
Just out for a bit. I didn't want to ruin the moment by revealing where I was headed. I felt this was a personal step forward, something my parents didn't need to be involved in, especially after my grandfather had instructed me to not tell them. When I arrived at my grandfather's house, something felt off. The curtains were drawn, and the house was eerily quiet. "Come in." Once I stepped inside, I saw two large men sitting on the couch, staring at me. They stood up the moment I entered, and before I could say a word, they grabbed me. "What are you doing? Let me go!" They dragged me down a hallway, ignoring my screams and struggles. My grandfather followed behind, his face blank, showing no remorse. "Take him to the back." The men shoved me into a small, dark room and slammed the door shut. I heard the lock click, and my heart sank. "Let me out, please." "You'll stay there until you're gone for good. No one will miss you. You were never supposed to be part of this family." I collapsed onto the cold floor, stunned. My grandfather didn't just hate me, he wanted me dead. He intended to starve me, to erase me from his life completely. The room was pitch black, with no furniture, no water, and no way out. I screamed until my voice gave out, but no one came. Meanwhile, after 6 hours, my parents noticed I was missing. By the evening, they were panicking.
Have you seen Manuel? He told me he was going out for a bit.
He didn't say anything to me. Maybe he's with his friends. They searched the neighborhood, called my friends, and contacted the police. When they reached out to my grandfather, his response was cold, and he pretended to not know where I was. Why would I care? I'm glad he's gone. That night, I sat in the darkness, weak from hunger and thirst. I felt hopeless, abandoned, and terrified. After 2 days of being kidnapped, I suddenly heard screams from my grandfather. Fire! Fire! Somebody help me! Fire! I was scared. If the house was on fire, I needed to get out. In my desperation, I found a window covered with wooden planks. It was my only chance. With what little strength I had left, I began pulling at the boards. It took a little time, and my hands were raw and bleeding, but I finally created a gap big enough to squeeze through. Once I was out, I saw smoke coming out from the front door. I didn't know how to help, so I rushed to the nearest house, pounding on the door until a neighbor answered. Call the fire department. My grandfather's house. It's on fire. Fire trucks arrived within minutes, but the flames were already raging. I watched in horror as they battled to control the blaze. The firefighters managed to rescue my grandfather, but he was severely burned. Apparently, my grandfather had fallen asleep in the kitchen with a cigarette in his hand. The fire had spread quickly, consuming the front of the house. We were both taken to the hospital where my parents and our other family members were called. They were shocked to see me. I told them the truth about my kidnap, and the family was devastated. My adoptive parents were heartbroken and furious, unable to understand how someone could be so cruel.
How could you kidnap your grandson? I know you hate him, but how can you be so cruel?
I'm ashamed to call you my father. You deserve this. Cruel. My grandfather, lying on a stretcher, didn't even try to deny it. Even if he wanted to, he couldn't because he was in a critical condition. The burns were severe. For days, he lingered between life and death. During that time, the story spread through the other family members and the community. People were horrified. The man they once respected was now known as a monster who tried to kill his grandson because of a grudge. When he finally passed away, no one mourned him. His reputation was destroyed, his legacy tarnished. At his funeral, only a handful of people attended. There were no flowers, no heartfelt eulogies. He was buried quietly, like an outcast, and the family moved on, determined to forget the man who had brought so much pain. My adoptive family didn't stop loving me. They made me believe I was more than his hatred. I was loved, and that was all that mattered. I was determined to never let them down, so I focus on my studies. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment down below saying I subscribed, and we will try our best to reply to your comment. I decided it was time to teach Simon a lesson. If he wanted to steal from me, he'd have to pay the price. Wiring up electronics is something of a hobby of mine, and I decided that I would make a trap for Simon. I rigged up a package with a little surprise inside. I wired it so that anyone who touched it would get a mostly harmless and very unpleasant electric shock. To top it off, I added a stink bomb inside the box. When it went off, it would cover the thief in a foul-smelling substance that wouldn't wash off easily. To make sure that, should he take the package with him though, I hid a tracking tag in the bottom of the package as well. The next day, I placed the trap on my porch and made sure my camera was ready. Then I went to work, hoping my plan would work. When I got home that evening, the trap had been sprung. The package was gone, but my camera had captured everything. There was Simon, sneaking onto my porch in his signature hoodie. He grabbed the package, and the second he lifted it, the shock hit him. He stumbled back, flailing his arms, and then the stink bomb went off, covering him in a thick, foul-smelling goo. Hi there, I'm Benny, and I've lived in my quiet little neighborhood for years. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where kids ride their bikes on the street and neighbors exchange friendly waves. Well, at least it used to be. Everything changed when I got a new neighbor. A man by the name of Simon moved in next door. At first, I didn't think much of him. He seemed a little odd, always wearing that same black hoodie with the obscure band logo on it, and avoiding eye contact. He kept to himself mostly, and he never spoke to anyone, and his house always had the blinds drawn. To each their own, I thought. But then, things started to go missing. It started with my packages. I would order things online often, and the delivery drivers would leave them on my front porch. I'd even get a notification that a delivery had been made, but when I got home, there was nothing there. At first, I thought maybe it was a mistake. Maybe the delivery driver left it at the wrong house. But after it happened 3, 4, 5 times, I knew something was up. And so I asked around the neighborhood, and sadly, I wasn't the only one that had been targeted. Thinking that it was some bored teenagers or neighborhood thieves, I decided to set up a doorbell camera. If someone was stealing my stuff, I'd catch them in the act. Sure enough, the very next day, my camera recorded someone sneaking onto my porch and swiping a package. The thief was wearing a ski mask and a black hoodie. But that hoodie, I'd seen it before. Simon wore one just like it all the time. The band logo that was on it was unmistakable. Seeing this, I got the urge to confront Simon and get him to stop and never take my packages ever again. "Hey Simon, can I talk to you for a second?" "Ugh, I'm busy. What do you want?" Me and a bunch of our neighbors have been having some issues with our packages going missing. And, well, my camera caught someone stealing them. They were wearing a hoodie just like yours. "Oh, is that a fact? Are you accusing me of something?" "Should I? So you think that I stole your packages? Well, I don't need to steal your crap. I have everything I need. Look, I'm not saying it was you. I'm just saying it's a weird coincidence, and if you happen to know who it was, then maybe you can get them to stop." "Well, it wasn't me. So you can go bother someone else." And I didn't believe him for a second, but without a clear shot of his face, I didn't have enough evidence to prove it was him. Frustrated, I decided to let it go, for now, but that I would keep an eye on him, and maybe he would slip up and I would catch him in the act, or now that I had told him that I suspected him, that maybe he might stop. But things only got worse. Sadly, the packages were only the beginning of the problems. A few weeks later, I got my electricity bill. When I opened it, my jaw nearly hit the floor. I had lived here for over a decade and it had never been that high before. It was more than double what it usually was. I couldn't understand it, as nothing had changed. I didn't get any additional appliances or do anything out of the ordinary that would warrant such a drastic increase. Something wasn't adding up. I started checking around the house, thinking maybe I'd left a light on or a device plugged in. Although I couldn't understand how leaving 1 or 2 lights on could account for that much of an increase, I was desperate to find some reason for it. That's when I noticed something odd. A couple of extension cords were running from the side of my house, through the bushes, and straight into Simon's backyard. That's it. I've had enough of this guy. As if the stolen packages and electricity theft weren't enough, Simon's behavior got even worse. One weekend, I went to a local nursery and bought a bunch of different plants. I got some bushes, flowers, and even a couple small young fruit trees. I decided to get up extra early and do the hard work planting all the various things I bought in my front garden. It had been a while since I'd had the time, and I was looking forward to sprucing up the place. Plus, gardening has always made me happy and usually reduced stress. The next morning, I stepped outside to find that someone had trampled my freshly planted flowers and had snapped the thin fruiting trees in half. The soil was scattered everywhere, and the plants were crushed. My stomach sank. I checked the footage from my doorbell camera, and there it was. Simon, wearing the same ski mask that he had worn before and in his usual hoodie, stumbling through my yard late at night. He appeared to be drunk or something, kicking at the flower beds as he passed. Unbelievable. What the hell did I ever do to this guy? I marched over to his house, pounding on the door. It probably wasn't a good idea, but I was at my wit's end. "Simon, open up!" He cracked the door open just enough to glare at me. I could easily tell that he was hungover, if not still drunk. "Oh, it's you. What do you want now?" "You destroyed my garden last night," I said, holding up my phone to show him the footage. "Care to explain?" "You're imagining things. I mean, that clearly isn't me, and you can't prove that it was." "Don't you dare! I have you on camera. If this doesn't stop, I'm going to the police." "And tell them what? Some mysterious person stepped on your flowers? Give me a break. Again, you can't prove anything. That person in the video could literally be anyone. For all I know, you ruined your own garden, and now you're trying to frame me for doing it." He scoffed and shut the door in my face. I was so angry that I could barely think straight until I went home and had a good few hours to calm down. I decided it was time to teach Simon a lesson. If he wanted to steal from me, he'd have to pay the price. Wiring up electronics is something of a hobby of mine, and I decided that I would make a trap for Simon. I rigged up a package with a little surprise inside. I wired it so that anyone who touched it would get a mostly harmless and very unpleasant electric shock. To top it off, I added a stink bomb inside the box. When it went off, it would cover the thief in a foul-smelling substance that wouldn't wash off easily. To make sure that, should he take the package with him though, I hid a tracking tag in the bottom of the package as well. The next day, I placed the trap on my porch and made sure my camera was ready. Then I went to work, hoping my plan would work. When I got home that evening, the trap had been sprung. The package was gone, but my camera had captured everything. There was Simon, sneaking onto my porch in his signature hoodie. He grabbed the package, and the second he lifted it, the shock hit him. He stumbled back, flailing his arms, and then the stink bomb went off, covering him in a thick, foul-smelling goo. I wasted no time calling the police. When they arrived, I showed them the footage and told them that I had placed a tracking tag inside of it, and even told them all about the stink bomb I had used. They were impressed by my setup and agreed to check out Simon's house. I found it surprising that they would just take me at my word, but apparently I wasn't the only one that had complained about Simon. They had been slowly building up evidence against him, and this was just the final straw. We'll take it from here. If we go over there and he smells like the stink bomb you included in the trap, or the tracker you used is found in his house, then we will have probable cause to go into his house. We won't even need a warrant. It didn't take long for the police to put the pieces together. They used the tracker I used and found that the signal from it was coming from inside Simon's house. They then knocked on Simon's door, and when he answered, still smelling like a landfill, they knew they had their man. With probable cause, they entered his house and found hundreds of stolen packages inside. Some of them were mine. Most of them weren't. Simon, you're under arrest for theft. There is more than enough evidence, so please just come with us quietly. This is ridiculous. I didn't do anything. I've clearly been framed. At that point, Simon tried to make a run for it, but the police tackled him and were forced to cuff him and pin him to the ground in order to stop him from running away. They even had to hit him a few times with their batons to get him to stop resisting. The evidence against Simon was undeniable and very overwhelming. The police found evidence that Simon had stolen so many packages that his basement was full of empty boxes, and he had been selling the things he didn't want or need online. When it went to court, it came out that Simon wasn't Simon. The name was just the latest that he had chosen to go by. Apparently, he habitually would steal from people or commit fraud, and when things got too dicey, he would change names and move. It did not go well for Simon, and he was sent to prison for a decade, and his house was seized as part of the investigation. A few months later, a young family bought Simon's house. They were friendly, polite, and even brought over cookies to introduce themselves. It was a welcome change after dealing with Simon's nonsense. Life in the neighborhood finally went back to normal, and I could order packages without worrying about them disappearing. As for Simon, well, let's just say I hope he's enjoying his new accommodations. Thanks for watching.
Seeing that I didn't respond, she grabbed one of our ceramic bowls and smashed it on the floor. My eyes widened in shock as she grabbed one of the pieces, gave herself a tear on her right hand before quickly dropping it. She let out a loud cry, her eyes immediately forming tears. My mom rushed in.
What's all this commotion about, girls? Oh my God, Anna, how did this happen? Oh my God, you're bleeding. Oh my goodness.
I was confused. My mom looked so worried, checking Anna, who was sending me mischievous smiles.
She angrily threw the bowl on the floor and stabbed me with it because I was bringing in dishes for her to wash.
She's lying, Mom. She did that to herself. I gasped in shock when my mother landed me my second slap of the day.
How dare you tell such a shameless lie against your sister?
I was dumbfounded. Of course, she'd believed Anna over me. My name's Emma, and I was born 2 years after my elder sister's birth. Before then, my parents hadn't really expected a second child. Prior to their marriage, they'd planned to only have one child. However, they were making that plan without any form of protection. When my mom got pregnant, they were both not happy. When I turned out to be a girl, and not as beautiful as they would have wanted, they hated me. I mean, what do you get when you have sex without protection? A child. I came into their lives unexpectedly. I guess my sister's hatred for me began from there. My parents pampered her so much, feeding her with the hope of being their only princess for a long time. Anna was so beautiful and looked just like my mom, whereas I was a little fat. Everyone, including the neighbors, loved Anna more. When I was born, she was nearly 3. According to my parents, she avoided me for a whole month and had to be forced to look at me afterward. They didn't term it hatred, instead, they called it disappointment. While growing up, my sister and I weren't best of friends. We attended the same school but never spoke to each other. We were like strangers forced to be related. I'd tried a couple of times to get her to like me, but it was obvious that she didn't. One day, during my second year in junior high school, my friends had brought up the topic of elder sisters. According to them, some elder sisters might act all cold and hateful, but deep down, they loved their younger sisters. I gave it a thought. Anna was always so cold and mean to me, so I thought it was just her being an elder sister. I decided to talk to her about it. After school hours were over that day, I went over to Anna's school. She was in her first year in high school, and the school was only 2 buildings away from mine. I stood outside the gate with a pack of orange juice, knowing she loved oranges. When she walked out, I smiled and called out to her, waving. She was with a group of friends. As soon as she saw me, she had a disgusted look on her face. Together with her group, she approached me.
What the hell are you doing here?
I brought you orange juice. I just thought you might want it.
Oh, you did? Wow. Isn't she such a great sister?
I felt so good when she called me a great sister. I wondered why I hadn't thought about showing her love first. I thought it was so easy. I was beaming with smiles. Well, not until I felt the cold liquid trickling down my face from my head. Looking up, my sister was wearing a proud smile as she emptied the pack of juice on me with a sly smile on her face. Once the pack was empty, she threw it on me and leaned toward me.
If you ever show your stupid self here again, I'm gonna do something even worse to you.
She brushed me aside and I fell. My eyes itched with tears as I saw all the people staring at me. Some were mocking me while others stared at me pitifully. When no one approached to help me up, I got up myself. I wiped my tears, dusted my clothes, and walked away. When I got home, Anna wasn't home. I told my parents what happened and they were pissed off. They promised to reprimand her when she got back. Around 8 p.m. when she finally returned home, oozing cigarettes, my mom asked her why she did that.
I'm sorry, Mom and Dad. I had a very rough day, and she suddenly came to school when my friends were all there, and she is so fat I don't want to be seen with her. You know, it's a bit embarrassing when your fat younger sister comes to school. I always told her not to come there.
I'd found her excuse so stupid, but to my surprise, the blame was poured on me.
Why would you go there when she asked you not to? You shouldn't have gone there.
But Mom, I just wanted to give her a pack of juice.
Did she ask you for it? You need to learn to respect boundaries, Emma. This wouldn't have happened if you didn't cross hers. Now go to bed, and don't let me hear of this again.
And boom. It was buried under the carpet. I mean, I wasn't so surprised. Anna's actions had never been seen as wrong in the eyes of my parents. I cried myself to sleep that night. The memory of the embarrassment haunted me, and the unfair judgment hurt me even more. Barely 2 weeks later, we had a fight. I was doing the dishes and Anna was continuously coming to drop in dirty dishes. Each time she would mutter, "Wash it," as if she was intentionally pissing me off, knowing how much I hated getting extra dishes. She went on until I got so mad and yelled at her to stop. The next thing I received was a resounding slap across my face.
How dare you raise your voice to me? Huh? How dare you?
The affected cheek hurt so much. I was tempted to slap her back, but I held myself, knowing I could get into trouble for that. I turned, tears rolling down my eyes, and resumed washing the dishes. However, it seemed as though Anna wanted a fight. Seeing that I didn't respond, she grabbed one of our ceramic bowls and smashed it on the floor. My eyes widened in shock as she grabbed one of the pieces, gave herself a tear on her right hand before quickly dropping it. She let out a loud cry, her eyes immediately forming tears. My mom rushed in.
What's all this commotion about, girls? Oh my God, Anna, how did this happen? Oh my God, you're bleeding. Oh my goodness.
I was confused. My mom looked so worried checking Anna, who was sending me mischievous smiles.
She angrily threw the bowl on the floor and stabbed me with it because I was bringing in dishes for her to wash.
She's lying, Mom. She did that to herself. I gasped in shock when my mother landed me my second slap of the day.
How dare you tell such a shameless lie against your sister?
I was dumbfounded. Of course, she'd believed Anna over me. Anna was rushed to a hospital. When they returned, I was given the worst punishment of my life. They asked me to crawl around the whole yard thrice, apologizing to my sister for almost killing her. By the time I was done, I'd gotten so exhausted and had knees full of bruises, but my parents didn't care. Well, life was going that way until one day, during her final year in high school, my sister packed her bags and told my parents that she was leaving them.
I'm tired of life here. I'd love to have fun in a different way with new faces.
We were all shocked. My parents probably thought she was kidding when she opened the door. As they heard the gates close, they ran after her, and I immediately followed.
Stop right there, Anna. If you take one more step, I'm gonna disown you right now and never have anything to do with you till I die.
Anna turned to them with a smile. She threw them her middle fingers and continued her journey. I could see the devastation on their faces as they walked back to the house. Unfortunately, a year later, my dad had a heart attack in his sleep and died. Without a doubt, I knew it was triggered by his thoughts about my sister. Before his funeral, his will was read to us. As expected, my sister had received the majority of it, even after disappointing my dad. However, since she wasn't around, my mom was put in charge of everything Anna got. I was only given a house and little money. At the time, my mom didn't care much about what I used mine for. All she wished for was her precious daughter to return home. Meanwhile, I started a business, online, with some of the money I saved up, and I invested the rest in stock through the help of my business teacher. I soon graduated from high school. My mom wasn't in attendance because she had something busy to take care of, but I didn't mind. On my dad's first remembrance, Emma suddenly appeared. My mom rushed to her and pulled her into a tight hug. She looked so tattered. Nevertheless, she joined us in finishing up before we all headed home.
Where have you been, Anna? Do you know how lonely your actions made me feel? I've lived like a childless woman since you left, Anna.
Aren't you going to tell her to even apologize?
Still jealous of me, I see.
Apologize for what, idiot? Why are you even here? Get lost.
I was boiling with anger, but I did leave the living room. A few minutes later, I was summoned by them. My mom asked me to give my share of the will to my sister. I refused to believe it. I refused and vowed to not give my house to Anna, no matter what they did to me. They weren't planning to give up either. The next day, on my way to the mall, Anna stopped me outside the house, grabbing my shirt tightly and holding a document. She explained that it was to hand over my share to her. My main concern was freeing myself from her grip. Roughly, she pushed me to the floor and straddled me, forcing a pen into my tightened fist. With all the strength in me, I pushed her off and got on her instead. All the anger stored in me, I let them all out with the punches I was landing on her face. She couldn't defend herself. She'd always been that weak. After I'd beaten her to my satisfaction, I got up, staggered to the nearest police station to make my report. Aside from the fact that they were forcefully trying to take my share of the will and that Anna had attacked me that morning, I also added that she was a huge drug addict. I wasn't sure why I had lied, but due to how she behaved and looked, I was sure she was hanging around bad friends and was taking some kind of drugs. When the police arrived and searched her room, a stack of drugs were found in her room after I told the cops to search everywhere. She was immediately arrested and locked up in jail. Apparently, before coming to the funeral, she'd also borrowed a huge sum of money from a dangerous gang due to her substance abuse problem. News had reached them that she was in jail, and they visited our house. I wasn't home, but my mom was. She was beaten up so badly, and they forced her to send all the money in her bank account to them. She was also threatened to face more if she didn't pay my sister's debt. I had moved out of the house and went into the one I inherited. My mom had to sell all the properties and pay them off with most of the money. Out of shame, she left the country and went to Italy, where she started working as a waitress in a small restaurant. Before leaving, she'd asked for my help, but I refused and sent her out of my house. A week after she left, I visited Anna in jail. Look at you, locked up behind bars with no father and a mother who abandoned you. Karma is real, isn't it?
Shut up, Emma!
Wow. That's rich, coming from a prisoner whose freedom rests in the hands of wardens. While you rot in here, I'll be going into college. My business is going well, and my stocks are doing great too. Even more, I have my own house. I burst into laughter, seeing how speechless she went, with her eyes filled with regret. I stood up and grabbed my bag. I hope you rot in here for a very long time. Goodbye, druggie. I felt so good afterward. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe.